me just start by some basic foundations for this whole topic. This, in my view, a critical question that has been raised by many people, including Professor Bernard Lewis. I remember in a lunch with him here in Washington, he asked me this question, which was a title of one of his books: what went wrong? What happened? Because if any one of you either witnessed himself or studied the Middle East area, let us say 60 years ago or 70 years ago, you'll find Muslims, Jews, Christians living together in harmony. You'll see churches. You never hear that someone went to burn a church or destroy a synagogue. This was virtually not existent. So what happened? How this changes, like the world, how the Middle East changes, and then the whole world. From an eyewitness on the events that happened, I can tell you what happened can be summarized in simple 3 steps, nothing more. Maybe there were some aggravating factors, but essentially 3 steps. Step 1 is when Saudi Arabia became very wealthy with oil, and we started in the Middle East and the surrounding countries to adopt their very literal, intolerant ideology that simply does not accept the existence of the other. You will not see a church in Saudi Arabia, for example. You will not see music and art. Women are very suppressed. You will see literal interpretation of the religion with a stoning, all such things. We started to say to one another, and when Saudi Arabia became very wealthy in the late 70s, which is the time of the beginning of the Islamic revival, we started to say, look how Allah or God blessed them with all this money and oil because they implement this form of Islam. And we started to think our Islam, which was relatively tolerant, it was not perfect, but was relatively tolerant, we thought it is the wrong Islam and they have the correct one. So we started to follow them. Women started to put the hijab. My wife Maha used to wear the hijab. She was the first one in her high school to wear it and in her family. And it was a phenomenon growing everywhere. We called it the Islamic revival. And this was the first step, and some authors call it Petro-Islam because it was related to oil. The second step was when we adopted this ideology, we did not stop there. And I'm talking here about my own country, Egypt. I'm not speaking about every Egyptian, but I'm talking about the radical groups and especially the radical leaders. Changing the level of jihad. You know jihad, of course. It's basically in Sharia books that's taught by the Wahhabis. It's a form of war either to protect the Muslim world or to spread the religion. After offering people 3 options: Islam or jizya, humiliating tax, or you will be killed. That was the evil deal that was throughout history. And through this deal, Islam spread in North Africa and in different parts of the world. And we adopted this principle, but the real disaster was that we changed the level of jihad from a nation responsibility or national to individual or personal responsibility. So me, as a young Muslim, before the Islamic revival and before this change, I was supposed to wait for the Muslim nation to create an army and to declare war on the Americans or the Europeans. Like the Muslim nation was against, or empire or caliphate was against the Roman Empire, for example. It was traditional warfare, a nation against. I was not supposed to attack you individually. So what happened when we changed the level of jihad to make it personal, which was based on a specific understanding of verses from the Quran and the Hadith, like the one that says, فَقَاتِلْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ لَا تُكَلَّفْ إِلَّا نَفْسُكَ. Fight for the cause of Allah, you are only responsible for yourself. So we took this verse and the other hadith and we said, look, we will no longer wait for the Muslim nation or ummah to declare war on the others. We will do it individually. Now in this new reinterpretation, after changing the level of jihad, we started to adopt the group attacks and then individual attacks, what we see today of lone or homegrown terrorism, and all these cases are the concept of jihad, but taken at a personal level. And I have to admit, we in Egypt, the Egyptian radical groups, were the ones behind the change of the ideology. But this does not mean that jihad was originally peaceful and then it became violent. No. It was violent and it became barbaric. That is the change that happened. So we need to understand the shift was not from a peaceful concept to a violent one. It was from a violent one when I declare war on you as a nation, to force you in my religion and offer you three options, Islam or Jizya or to be killed. That's not a peaceful concept. And this is what ISIS is doing today. They are not creating the concept. The concept is created by the religious scholars, sadly. But the ISIS are the ones who are applying it. That's the only difference. The third step, after we changed the level of jihad and now individuals can attack churches and attack other people, as we see today, the whole phenomena spread globally through your wonderful immigration policies. And today, with the internet and the spread of the ideology, the phenomena that was local and in this certain part of the world has spread globally to reach every part now. And this where we are today. 3 steps happened in the last few decades. Can explain to you what we see today. Why these people are doing such things. It is the same ideology, but things became personal, and then the internet and the immigration allow the spread of everything to the whole world. This is the first part. The second part I would like to address is the psychodynamics of this phenomenon. How can someone like this lady in California, for example, or some young guy changes from a peaceful person to become that evil? How can a human being change? I lived this change so I can talk from reality, and thank God I did not continue. I didn't do any terror act or killing or any of this stuff, but I stopped before this and I changed it completely against them. This was 30 years ago and more. But the concept, I can tell you what happens exactly in the human mind. First of all, if you come to me now and told me, Tawfik, go and kill some human being standing here. Not you, of course. Okay, then the other direction. No. So the first thing that you need to do is to make me hate this individual. This is the first thing you need to do. Otherwise, why should I go kill him? Why? What's the reason? I have to hate him first. So the hatred, the concept of hatred, the promotion of hatred to Jews, Christians, Americans, Europeans, everyone else, everyone different, even reformers, the Baha'i, everyone that is not on their agenda, we have to hate it, or we had to hate him. So the concept of hatred is the beginning. That's why when we say that love can be the antidote of the phenomena, I can say yes. I can say yes, if we went to the deep root of it. But let us go to more sophisticated level. I hated that individual. Then I moved one step toward killing the person. What will happen is my human conscience will start to tell me, Tawfik, this guy didn't do any bad thing to you. He didn't harm you. Why should you kill him? Then my human conscience can work. Then you need to teach me how to suppress my human conscience. And this is exactly what religious scholars used to do, is to teach us how to practically suppress our human conscience. Naturally, when you read some of the very violent things about Prophet Muhammad in the history, biography of Muhammad, for example, Sirah, or the marriage of a young girl of 9 years old, naturally, your conscience will reject such things. But do you know what used to happen in our mind? The distortion has reached the level. You have to suppress your conscience and not only say by tongue that this is great or good. You have to feel that it is good and great. Otherwise, you will be in hell forever. You'll be tortured, barbecued forever, literally forever in the hell. Or put in boiling oil forever. So can you imagine the fear mechanism has reached the level that as if you are tasting mud and you have to say, not just to say, you have to feel it is nice, it's beautiful. It's not just you have to say it, you have to feel it. Can you imagine the level of distortion of the mindset of these people? This can explain to you how they lose their human conscience. The level of fear and the inability to criticize or use critical thinking and the suppression of all human conscience and the critical thinking allow a person to reach the third level, which is desensitization to the use of violence. When you read about the acts in the Hadith book about the violence and how some poet, for example, objected to the Prophet and spoke negatively against him, and how he put her between two camels and she was destroyed and her head was beheaded, and you read all these torture things and you have to feel that it is something nice. It is so beautiful. The three steps occur here. First, the hatred, the suppression of human conscience, and then the desensitization to the use of violence. Because the moment you start to attack someone, if you are not used to the use of violence, then your hand may shake and you will not do it. But gradually, by desensitization to the use of violence, by approving stoning of women to death, for example, by approving this barbaric hudud things in the Sharia, for example, the amputations of hand, putting people on the cross, and all these violent things makes your spirit and soul become desensitized to the use of violence. So you go into three steps gradually. You start to hate the individual. Then you suppress. If your human conscience objected to any violence, you start to suppress your human conscience. Then, if your hands start to shake before you're doing the violent act, then they teach you how to become desensitized to the use of violence. And gradually you are ready to become a terrorist or a human being who is deprived of his human conscience, deprived of love, deprived of critical thinking. And this can end up with people like Saeed Farouk, and Tashfeen Malik, the ones in California, just the recent attack. This tells us how these people gradually can reach that level. And I have to tell you, we are lucky. Till this moment, we are very lucky that the radicals have not gained yet weapons of mass destruction. Because if these people with this barbarism have any access to weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapon, and this is what's worrying me in the near future, not even too far from now. I'm extremely worried. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm really worried. Then let us go to address our failures. It's important to evaluate the areas where we failed at, to understand why we are not winning. Why, with all the power we have and all the money and all the capabilities, these people are growing compared to September 11th, before September 1 and now. And you will understand how we are losing this war with them. They are expanding geographically. Their numbers are increasing. So why we failed? First of all, we failed because we failed to define the problem. How it's like if we are playing basketball without putting the hoops. If you do not have clarity about the goal, where you shoot, where you aim, then you can spend for the rest of your life trying for infinity of time. There is no parameters for the concept of radicalism. And that is why I put something called the ABC's test of radical Islam. It's available on my website. It's myname.com. I put it because when I came to Washington, I realized people are talking about the word radical and moderate day and night. But when I ask them, do you have a definition for this? They say, no, not really. So it's like for me when I say blood glucose is elevated, I'm a medical doctor. If I said blood glucose is elevated, so what is the normal? Oh, I don't know the normal. It's elevated compared to what? Does not make sense in my mind, really. And when we talk about, for example, the size of the pyramid, is it big or small? You can say big, and I can say small for the rest of our life, and it will never end. Because it can be big compared to your size, and the small compared to the size of galaxy. So we need parameters. So I put what I call the ABCs test for radical Islam, and I challenged all the Islamic organizations I could reach to denounce them. If they are truly moderates, they should be able to denounce them. The first, I put A, B, C, D, E, F, G. A, apostate killing. B, barbaric treatment of women, like beating women, for example, and stoning. C, calling Jews pigs and monkeys. And I do remember one day in Dearborn, Michigan, I was speaking in front of an audience around 900, and it was night time, and I was talking about the ABCs. So some imam from Senegal stood up and approached me, interrupting the speech, telling me, Dr. Hamid, why you mention these violent things? I am a moderate imam, and I participate in interfaith dialogue. And I actually have many Jewish friends here in the community. I said to him, excellent imam, would you mind, imam, instead of telling us how moderate you are, to prove this to us tonight? Everyone was listening. And I said to him, look, imam, would you mind to invite me and some of our Jewish friends and brothers and sisters to your mosque next Friday prayer? And instead of telling us how moderate you are, just stand in front of your congregation and say it clearly, loudly, and unambiguously that Jews are not pigs and monkeys. Would you do this, imam? He didn't say a word. He didn't utter one single letter, believe me. It was really painful to see how that level of betrayal, because they use the concept there is no definition for radicalism. So anyone can go by saying, I'm a moderate. No, you have to prove this. So that is the first part of our failure. The second part of our failure is the failure of analysis. We fail to analyze the problem correctly. I remember after September 11th, several op-eds were written and people on the media saying, oh, it has nothing to do with the ideology. It's all about poverty and lack of education and the Arab-Israeli conflict and all such stuff, okay? Obviously, Nidal Hassan of Fort Hood massacre was not poor. Ayman Al-Zawaherri, the head of Al-Qaeda, is highly educated, and many of them. And you see how many terrorists are really, you probably know more. Claire Lopez with us here tonight. She knows a lot about this topic, and she can tell us how many of them are highly educated, how many are wealthy people, not just rich. Bin Laden himself was a billionaire. When people say to me it is the Arab-Israeli conflict, if this is solved, all this trouble will be solved. And my answer to them, or my question actually to them, is, are you trying to convince me that killing more than 150,000 innocent Algerians by the hands of the Salafi groups in the 90s, and beheading their infants in front of the parents, and the Sunni killing Shia in a brutal way and mutilating their dead bodies in Iraq, and the Salafists exploding the mosque of the Sufis in Pakistan, are you trying to convince me that all these atrocities are because of the Arab-Israeli conflict? That's one of the problems why we live in our imagination. And all of this because we were dishonest. Because scientific honesty necessitates that when you sit down to evaluate any problem, you become unbiased and honest to God. And if the problem is in the ideology, you say it is in the ideology. If the problem is in something else, you say it is something else. If it's mixed, you say it is mixed. But you cannot start your analysis without having this level of honesty. If you start the analysis by saying, no, it cannot be the ideology, because some people say, if the Islamic ideology was the cause of the problem, how come there are many Muslims who are not terrorists or radicals? And my answer to them, cigarette smoking, for example, is the majority of cigarette smokers do not develop lung cancer. Yet this does not change the fact that cigarette smoking is the cause of lung cancer. The same here. You see, having the majority of Muslims not terrorists does not mean the ideology itself is not the cause of the problem. The same example exactly. So the second failure was the concept of trying to justify the problem by calling it because of poverty or lack of jobs, and the question that should be raised here is why these factors, the lack of jobs or lack of education and poverty, is affecting the young Muslims rather than the young Christians or Buddhists or Hindus who live under the same socio-economic and political circumstances. Why, for example, if the poverty or lack of education are the cause of the problem, they shouldn't differentiate. The effect should be on Muslims and non-Muslims as well. There are many poor nations, and there are people who live with no democracy. When people say democracy, I think what we see today of terrorist act in France, in America, what happened in London before, is it also because of lack of democracy? So we really, the whole point was the moment when we decided to take the ideology out of the equation and say, look, I will start, it's like a doctor saying, look, I will do the study for the pathology slide, but to begin with, I cannot say it is cancer because it is politically incorrect. So it has to be something else. And he started the research. It doesn't work that way. What if it was cancer? Okay? That's why I was, I can say happy and a bit optimistic when President Obama's speech last time. There were some negative aspects, but this was certainly positive when he mentioned that there are certain interpretations that create hatred, and the Muslim world has to work and change this. This was good change. I'm not talking about the whole thing, but this particular part was good. I believe so. After that, the third level of failure was failure in understanding some words. Like, for example, many people use the expression Islamophobia, which limited us from really speaking openly about the problem. Everyone speaks against them. They say it is Islamophobia. You are Islamophobe. One day in the Wall Street Journal, I remember in one of my op-eds, I wrote clearly that if care organization, and this is what happened, they accused me of being Islamophobe. I said, yeah, if care organization is considering me an Islamophobe, because I stand against killing the apostate and beating women and stoning people to death and the wars to spread the religion, then I will take their accusation as a badge of honor. Yes. And I'm happy to be an Islamophobe in this situation. If Islamophobia means to stand against this evil, I'm happy to be the first Islamophobe. Thank you. But let me take it to more depth. The word Islamophobia does not really apply here. Why? Because phobia, according to psychiatry books, is irrational fear of something. I have a phobia of cockroaches. Honestly, if I see a cockroach, you will see me running here. Okay? This is irrational. The cockroach will not kill me, will not do anything. But I have phobia. That's irrational fear. When we see the phenomena of radical Islam, I will say it is be irrational if you did not fear it. In other words, it cannot be classified as phobia because phobia is irrational, and this is very rational. When you see the statistical data having the highest terrorist rate coming from the Muslim world, and the only places that still apply barbaric treatments of women like stoning and acceptance of slavery at the highest level of the religious authorities, if you don't have fear of this system, then you need to be treated. Honestly. The phobia here, when you think deeply, it cannot be classified as phobia. So this is about how the word Islamophobia was used just to intimidate us and prevent us from saying the truth. The fourth level here of the failure, and here I will actually quote my wife, Maha. She was the one who really created this idea. One day we were at our house and she said to me, do you know Tariq? My real name is Tariq, by the way. Tawfik is just the name for some security reasons. And she said to me, do you know, many in the West think that the America here, for example, became a beacon for liberty and democracy because they are tolerant. And when you talk to anyone, really, in many people, they say, oh, we have to be tolerant. And she said to me, do you know, the reality is quite the opposite. I said to her, how? She said to me, had America been tolerant to slavery, slavery would exist today. So in fact, America became America, not because it was tolerant, but because it was intolerant. You were intolerant to slavery, that's why you defeated it. You were intolerant to discrimination against women, that's why you ended it. You were intolerant to anti-Semitism, that's why you tried to fight it. Had you been tolerant to this evil would have existed today. So you became beacon for liberty and democracy, not because you were intolerant, but not because you were tolerant, but because you were intolerant. It's like our immune system. I like to give medical examples, my profession. In our immune system, there is something called immunotolerance. That's part of the immune. If you study immunology, it is part of the study. Immunotolerance simply means that our immune system has to be tolerant to our cells. Otherwise, it will destroy us. Okay? It has only to kill bacteria or bad. But do you know, every day in our body, 5 to 7 cancer cells develops, according to major pathology textbooks. It's not an opinion, it's fact. 5 or 7 to 7 cancer cells develop every day in the body. But thank God, our immune system in most circumstances detect this and become show intolerance to them or zero tolerance. It destroys them, and that's why we survive. If the immune system became tolerant to cancer cells, can you imagine what will happen? So this, what I'm saying here, and this is actually Maha's view, is how the word tolerance was not used correctly at all by many people when they try to use it to make us tolerate evil, tolerate barbarism. This does not work and will not work because this is against human nature. When I talk about solution for this problem, I'll give a brief theory because this is a very complex topic. But I see let me just to understand this, I would like to share with you how I see the Islamic culture. I see the Islamic culture as bullseye circles. And if you imagine with me the circles, from the beginning, the peripheral one is what we can call culture Muslims, or people who are just culturally Muslims. They celebrate the equivalent of Christmas, but in Ramadan and this stuff, and they don't know much about the religion. Just his name is Muhammad. That's what he knows about religion, or Fatima. Second level, or inner level, is what we can call ritual Muslims, who are people who just want to pray the 5 times, celebrate Ramadan and do the Hajj once and go to paradise as their thing, and they are done with that. They don't want Sharia, they don't want this stuff, they just want some personal relation with God, and they stop here. Then you have the inner circle, the theological Muslims, who wants to implement Sharia, but they don't use violence to do this. But they are a threat because once their number exceeded certain threshold in any society, then we are in trouble because they become empowered. When the number increases above certain threshold, they feel empowered really to start action. When they are minority, they don't have the same level of power. So that level start to want a Sharia law, but they don't use violence. Then you have the inner circle, the radicals, who are ready to use violence to force you on hijab or to stop you from doing something that they see un-Islamic. Then you have the innermost group, the terrorists or jihadists. And I typically give an example here. If we invited someone, for example, called Muhammad or Fatima to a party tonight, and Muhammad or Fatima celebrated everything with us in the party normally, no difference, likely he is or she is culture Muslim. If Muhammad or Fatima said, excuse me for 5 minutes, I will go to pray and come back to continue everything, Muhammad or Fatima are likely ritual Muslims. If Muhammad said with anger, how come you invite me while there is wine here? It's very insulting to me, and he left with anger, then Muhammad is theological Muslim. If Muhammad took the bottle of wine and broke it, then Muhammad is the radical Muslim. If Muhammad exploded the whole area, then in the day of judgment or up there, you will realize he was the terrorist, okay? So this is how I see things. And when we develop a strategy to deal with Muhammad or to deal with this whole phenomenon, we need to work at all these levels. For example, at the peripheral levels, education and reinterpretation of the Islamic text, which I can talk later and the questions area about it, reinterpretation of the text in different way. By the way, what time are we allowed to?
No, you're fine.
Sure, okay. Like I'll give you an example of the reinterpretation area, like that happened to me in person. When I was young, for example, there was a verse in the Quran that says, فَاقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَيْثُ وَجَدْتُمُوهُم, kill the infidels wherever you find them, okay? And I had trouble with this verse because I want to apply it to obey Allah. And so I thought about, should I go and fight the Christian neighbor that we have at that time, Auntie Fawzia, her name, or what should I do? I was really in trouble because she was a very good human being with me. So I went to a friend of mine called Adil Saif. He was a Salafi, very radical. And I asked him about this verse, kill the infidels wherever you find them. And he said to me, yes, we have to fight all these evil people and infidels. And he brought to me books for Ibn Taymiyyah and for some Pakistani scholars translated into Arabic about jihad and sharia. And he really gave strong theological support for his argument. Then I went to a sheikh or a Sufi scholar called Sheikh Sha'ban. He was with us in Cairo, in a closed mosque called Jamaa Islameia JI. And I went to Sheikh Sha'ban. I said to him, Sheikh Sha'ban, what can I do with this verse? I was truly in trouble because it was against my human conscience. Sheikh Sha'ban said to me, my son, just love every human being. He was a Sufi, mystical form of the religion. Just love every human being and be good with every human being. And the Lord will be happy with you. And I said to him, but Sheikh Sha'ban, it is written in the Quran. I was very literate. And he said to me, يَوْمَ يَأْتِي تَأْوِيلُهُ, which is another verse in the Quran that means in the day of judgment you will understand the meaning of the verse, not now. And I have to admit that I was not that patient to wait till the day of judgment to understand the meaning. I want now. So I was with the enthusiasm, I joined the radical group because they provided me with theological teaching. I didn't have any other alternative. Now with this modern interpretation for the Quran, you will find the same verse, but in a different way, with a touch of love and wisdom for it that can change the meaning. I took the verse at different levels of interpretation. Level 1 is who are those infidels, and the analysis is they are only the ones who fought Muhammad in the early stages of Islam. Second level, on which basis you build this assumption? On the fact that the verse uses the suffix the or al, which means the in English, before the word the infidels. It's like if I said to you, I'm going to a White House tomorrow, or the White House. If I use the, it can specify the meaning. It does not apply today to any other one. It's specific here. Third level, why the Quran was against them. According to the Quranic literature here, these people kicked Muhammad and the disciples. I know the Sunnah books tells other stories, but I'm talking here about the Quranic verses itself. Kicked them in the early believers from Mecca and they tortured them. They burned some of them alive. Fourth level of interpretation. What was the common theme of all these actions? It is discrimination against a small religious minority for their religious beliefs. Fifth level of interpretation. What can we learn today from this? Is not to discriminate against any religious minority. Otherwise, we will be exactly like those infidels. So the change here, it's the art of the teacher here. It's not, the text is the same, but the way of teaching can at least prevent disasters. Because had I been exposed to this interpretation, I wouldn't have continued in the Jamaa Islameia, for example. Okay, so it's part of the solution, but not the whole solution. This can work when a person is not radicalized yet. So let us divide it into three sections. Someone who is not radicalized, you can use reinterpretation and forms of education that can change the thinking process that leads to radicalism. There are many ways using cognitive psychology actually to deal with this issue. You can work here at the level of normal people via education or bringing in new ways of thinking to them. That can work as long as you are not radical. Once you reach the level of becoming radical, you need a powerful psychological operations or warfare to deter you from doing the attacks. When you think deeply, the radicals, for a radical Islamist, it is win-win-win situation for them, the terrorist act or the jihad. Because if they control the territory, like ISIS today, they will implement their Sharia laws and they will subjugate the whole area to Islamic system, and they are winners. If they died for Allah, they will go to paradise with the 72 virgins and they will enjoy infinity of pleasures in paradise. So they are winners. If they are caught by our civilized people in the war, the human rights activists will go to them to take care if they have halal meat or not. So they are winners in all situations. There is no deterrent for them. So why should they stop? Humans stop when there is sufficient deterrent for them. Like in World War II, what stopped the Emperor of Japan from continuing the war? Death. He didn't want to die. The same for the Nazi leaders. You know more about it. They didn't want to die, so they surrendered. But if your opponent wants to die, that's another story. There are other psychological warfare operations, and unfortunately I'm unable to reveal much about them. Okay? They have to be done in a very secretive manner. No one knows about them except very few people maybe on earth. But to give you an idea about, just a general idea, has nothing to do with these specific psychological operations that I have. If Bin Laden, or had Bin Laden, knew that if someone told him the whole Muslim world will be destroyed second day after you attack us in September 11th, he would have done it. They don't care about life. But if someone said to him, look, second day after this attack, hijab will be banned, there will be no hijab allowed for Muslim women in America, I can reassure you 99% he wouldn't have done it. So for them the hijab issue is more powerful than death. And that is the problem. When you deal with this phenomena, you deal from your own way of thinking and perspective. You try to solve it from your mindset, which does not fit with the reality there. So that's a big problem here. Whatever solution you will put is from your own view, and which could be completely different from how they see things. And that is the problem. What's happening in the world is partially because of this. When someone reaches a level of becoming a militant, then you have to use force, clear force. So, and when you use force, you apply the basic rules in medicine. We learned it when we were in the third year of the medical school. When you use antibiotics, you don't give half dose antibiotics. You give full dose, because half dose just create resistant strains. The same applies here. You want to use force? Use it fully. Don't go half-half. It doesn't work. It's actually counterproductive. So if you divide it into 3 stages, just a general simplified idea. A normal person, education and reformation and changing the thinking process can work very well with them before the stage of radicalism. When someone reaches the stage of radicalism, you need powerful psychological operations to deter them from a negative reinforcement tactic, to deter them from doing more attacks on us. And this does not mean force, it's all soft power and knowledge. And the third level, when someone becomes a militant, you have to use powerful force against him. Finally, let me just think loudly with you about the current situation in the world. As I expressed earlier, the real fear I have is if this ideology is coupled with a weapon of mass destruction, then we are in real trouble, and wars of civilizations will be inevitable. In fact, there are wars now, it has started already, and that's why, and when we think deeply about what we see today, and when we go back to September 11th, we have to remember that the ideology of September 11th came from the Wahhabists in Saudi Arabia. And the brains that taught this ideology and the organization process occurred by many Egyptians. 70% of Al-Qaeda were Egyptians. The cultivation of the process occurred in Afghanistan. The orchestration of the attacks was in Germany by some radical Islamists there. And the attack occurred here. So we need to understand that we deal with the global phenomena. And in order to defeat this phenomena, and I will quote you again, my dear wife here, the whole civilized world, through moderate Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindus, Republicans, and Democrats, all nations who respect human dignity and civilization must all unite, and then unite. Thank you all, and God bless America. Thank you so much. Please, just sure. I will take every question, depending on the time. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Weiss. I have 2 questions. I know it's the ideology. I know.
One is enough.
Yeah. But I get a lot of videos from people showing in the Middle East the mosques and the abuse that's perpetrated on little kids for seemingly no reason. And I was wondering, since you were talking about psychology, what role just the culture of abuse might play
absolutely.
In that. And the second thing is, if you could just comment on your positions of what we should do about ISIS and also the refugee issue.
Okay.
Just those little things.
Very little. Just in brief. Certainly the use of force with the children and being violent with them is part of the concept of desensitization to the use of violence that I addressed earlier. The second, what to do today with the refugees. Simply you need to do what is beneficial for your nation. Don't let emotions play a role here. And also be very vigilant on the vetting process, how people enter. If you remember the marathon bombing, for example, 2 years before the marathon bombing, the FBI investigated one of the perpetrators, and they said, oh, there is no signs of radicalism. Simply, when you don't know what are the signs of radicalism, then you will never be able to discover them. Like I was talking to Bob recently about, for example, one of the early signs of or signs of radicalism is when you say to someone, Assalamu alaikum. If he replied, which means peace be upon you, if he replied, peace be upon you too, wa alaikum salam in Arabic, likely is okay. Okay, likely. But if he said wa alaikum only, which means upon you, without repeating the word peace, This is one of the very first lessons that we learned when we became radical. Never reply by the word peace to Jews or Christians or non-Muslims. You see what I mean? So this is one of the early signs. So things like this, if you don't know them, you will never know if this person is radical or not. And there are other ways, like the speed of response to certain questions. You ask him about ISIS or Bin Laden and see the speed. If someone response was instant, they are evil, that's fine. But if he took some few seconds to think, and he started to swallow, because when people lie, the sympathetic system works, so, and the salivation became thick, so they have to swallow the secretions. That's true. Then you can realize if there is a time gap here for a few seconds, that could be very serious. So there are certain parameters, the way they stand in prayers, the way of the beard and the chain, that's a big topic by itself. We can talk separately about it later. Yes, sir.
So would you give us a little bit more insight about the reaction to President Obama's comments on Sunday night?
Absolutely. There was two, I can summarize them in two things. There was some positive, negative areas and some positive areas. The negative area that was, like, I felt that shouldn't have been said is when he said in certain way that as if America put troops there, it will be unable to defeat ISIS, and it will be just he showed that America is unable to defeat them on ground, and that shouldn't have happened. These people should know that we can destroy you, we can erase you from earth. That is the language they understand, okay? So showing any sign that tells them that we will not put troops because we cannot win there was something that I felt shouldn't have been said, at least from the radical mindset here. The positive part, which I was very happy with it, not just happy, is when he, for the first time, admitted the role of the interpretations that creates hatred. This is very significant at the beginning of a change, possibly in the policy itself. To admit that there are interpretations that can create hatred and which can cause this problem is huge, because in the past they never admitted it. They always say the ideology has nothing to do with it. But he was wise enough to call it interpretations, rather it's very wise at this stage, so to use this expression. So this was the positive part, and I have to say I was very impressed with it. Yes, sure. Yes, sir. So my apology, I just...
I have always believed that the Obama administration is very heavily influenced by Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
So my question to you would be, do you ever imagine that this administration will hire you as a consultant? And if it did, would you accept it?
Of course, if they did, I will accept, okay? Not because I have certain political affiliation or anything, but my affiliation is toward humanity. My affiliation is toward our civilization. My affiliation is toward becoming a peacemaker, and the blessed are the peacemakers, as you know, okay? So that's why I feel as an obligation for me, I will accept this. In fact, I was already I met recently with the Deputy Secretary of State, and I was the one who mentioned to him clearly that they need to talk about the word interpretations of rather than the word religion, because for them they were hesitant to approach the word use the word religion. So I suggested using the word interpretation. I was very happy that it happened, so I will certainly accept. And I agree with you. There is a lot of infiltration, partially because could be lack of knowledge, could be intentional, could be, I don't know, depending on the person and the group. I cannot really say what is the reason of the infiltration. Sometimes people do not want to offend the Muslims, and they think that being so nice is the only way to bring solutions. Sometimes you can be nice and yet truthful also. So that is the balance here, the critical balance, as I say. So irrespective of this, the current situation of the President of the United States admitting and asking the Muslim world and say it is inexcusable, with no excuse, that they have to stand against this. And I am happy to say that President Al-Sisi was a leader on this. He stood in front of the scholars. He said to them, eye to eye, you need to change. And maybe this encouraged the President Obama to go into this path. So I'm very happy. It's giving me some hope that we are finally starting to address, even though after 15 years, but at least we started to realize the cause of the problem and maybe working effectively in the future against it. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I got two questions for you, sir. The first one, when we're trying to get help from other Muslim countries, I mean, is there a reason why we're not calling the extremists the Khawarij? Like that's, you're talking about identifying who we're fighting.
Yeah.
You know, using that term to, you know, basically the other Muslim countries, that sort of shows a little bit of what, you know what you're talking about. Secondly, for guys that have boots on the ground, if you have to identify who these extremists are without talking about jihad, what sort of topics would you talk about? As far as like, I mean, when they were radicalizing you, was there the discussion of, 4 categories of Tawheed compared to 3 categories of Tawheed? Because I know that's a big topic for now, or even just takfir. What sort of topics would you talk about?
You mean the jargon, the discussion between the radicals among themselves?
Not talking about jihad.
Yeah.
If you had to identify who these
Look,
guys are.
the central focus of most of the radical groups, as I have seen it in reality, the main focus for them was they hated the West and the Western civilization, mainly because the freedom they have. For example, if you think deeply, the Western civilization is the antithesis of Sharia. It's like Sharia teaches killing apostate. You here teach freedom of religion. Sharia teaches suppression of women, beating women, and you teach respect for women and equality. Sharia teaches slavery. You reject slavery. Sharia teaches the West teaches no discrimination. I apologize if I confuse some words, but I mean the West teaches stop discrimination. They want the non-Muslim to be second-class citizens under Sharia. So the central core of the hatred was these values. Honestly, this was the central core of our hatred to the West. I couldn't get the first question, so please, at the end, you can tell it to me.
Khawarijites. Should we be calling them Khawarijites?
Khawarij. I think the Muslim word is supposed to be the one who is using this word, and recently started to use such expressions. But it is funny when we call them Khawarij, while Sheikh Al-Azhar, who is the head of the leading Islamic scholar in the world, just recently refused to call ISIS un-Islamic, and he says they are good believers, they are just doing some sins. So it is funny when we try to call them, and when I remember when President Obama said ISIS is un-Islamic. And I was going to write, I'm going to write this op-ed, by the way, soon. It's just I didn't have time to do things. ISIS is Islamic until proved otherwise. Tell me one thing that ISIS is doing and is not clearly written in mainstream Sharia books, not radical Sharia books, the mainstream ones. Bring me one single approved Islamic book. One, not two. And my challenge is one book, or one mullah at the highest level, standing clearly and unambiguously against killing apostate, or stoning, or the concept of Islam, or jizya, or killing people, or slavery. Bring me one single approved book, or one single top-level scholar who clearly say killing apostate is unacceptable, stoning women is wrong, slavery is unacceptable anymore, Jews are not pigs and monkeys. I need one, not two. I have been asked for more than 7 years about this question, and I did not get any answer yet. Yes.
Can you tell us why the president refers to ISIS as ISIL when so many use the term ISIS, and what is the significance of that? Is there a significance on the world stage, or is it just a matter of semantics?
I'll tell you, the correct word in Arabic, when they started, is called Al-Dawla Al-Islamiya, which is Islamic State, في العراق والشام. In Iraq and not Syria, not S. Sham, which is Levant or something. So Levant. So the correct word is with the L, to be honest and accurate. But what is not correct is when they changed their name to be IS, and we give blind eye to this and we ignore this change. This change is extremely significant. Do you know why? Because when it was ISIS or ISIL, it was Islamic State within certain geographical border. Their intention was to do destruction and mayhem and damage within certain borders. But when they removed the borders, when they changed it to IS only, this simply means they are starting to launch operations outside these borders. And this is what happened in France, after that twice, and here in America, and who knows what will come next. So this, what I really didn't like, is to ignore the word that they use for themselves. It is IS, Islamic State. And as I mentioned, the IS or the Islamic State is Islamic until proved otherwise. If the Islamic scholars did not come up and stand up and say clearly that the values implemented by ISIS are wrong and presented new educational reform that challenge with no hesitation all these barbaric values, then they are part of the process, and we cannot really separate. One is the theory, like Karl Marx, and one, Lenin, is the one who is implementing it. With I don't mean like exactly, but in general here. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question. Why do you think Saudi Arabia has such a hold on Western foreign policy? And I'm speaking all the way back to Reagan or all the way now to Obama. I mean, there is hardly any difference, in my opinion, between ISIS or ISIL or whatever and what happened in Saudi Arabia. But we still call them our close allies. How on earth are they our allies? And a quick second question. The epicenter of this problem, and I'm not trying to pin it on any one race or group, the epicenter seems to be Arabs and Pakistanis. I come from that area, so I'm allowed to say
Arab and
Pakistanis.
Pakistanis, yeah.
I mean, of course there are exceptions like Boko Haram here.
Yeah.
But it seems to be the epicenter is in that area.
Yeah.
Right. Why do you think that's the case?
First question is the Saudi Arabia is, I think, having an ally or not in Washington to a great extent is influenced by the economic interests. So it's not surprising for me to have. And number two, in Saudi Arabia is different from ISIS in one important part. The leaders in Saudi Arabia, or the royal family themselves, they use the religion to control people, and they may not be able actually to do something else, because in their first deal with the Wahhabists, the deal was the Wahhabists will empower them to reach power, but on return the Wahhabists will control the religion, the education, and the judges, the court system. So they are in trouble, but they themselves want a modern country. So they have a deal, or at least they want a country that does not allow individuals to go and do mayhem or destruction on their own. You see what I mean? So there is some people to deal with, and you can find some relatively moderate people in this group or the royal family. You can deal with them to bring some hope or some change in the system. But with ISIS, this does not exist. You deal with barbarians, all of them at all levels, and you don't have someone to sit with you. And the leaders of Saudi Arabia do not personally have an ambition to come and destroy and explode, do explosion here. Maybe they are doing other damage through ideological expansion, that's another issue. But they are not seriously interested in bringing an aeroplane down. But ISIS people are. So I'm just trying to compare. There is some area of difference here, and we can actually use it for our benefit. If we use proper diplomacy here and we bring the correct people on our side, we can hopefully make some change on this as a possibility. I'm putting possibilities that needs to further discussion, okay? But, so my apology. The second question, but it's important to say, Saudi Arabia teaches the same ideology in its schools. So the ISIS again is implementing it. So they are all part of the problem. And Saudi may have more part in solutions because they have more capability. Now they have to be really pushed toward playing more role in solutions. I don't know how this can happen because they built the whole system, and I will quote my wife again here, as a house of cards. This is how she called it. So the moment you start to change anything in the religion, they feel that the whole religion will collapse so that they can't touch it. And that's what they feel exactly. They cannot touch killing apostates because they feel the whole religion will collapse if they touch this area. So it's complex topic, but I'm more than happy to discuss it later in more details with you. But there was another question here. What was it?
Why is the epicenter of this?
In the Arab world, number one, at least Arab world are the leaders, I believe so, to a great extent, with all my respect to the Pakistanis. But I think there are several factors. One of them is they understand the religion more than areas like Indonesia and Malaysia. So the elements of Sharia, they can see it clearly written in the books. But an Indonesian guy or Malaysian guy does not read Arabic, so he is a bit far from understanding what Sharia really teaches. So they follow their human conscience to a great extent and the general understanding of Islam. But with the Arab world, they are more literal because they know the verses and the words. Also, the way of spread of Islam to these areas, Pakistan and Arab world, violent. But in Malaysia and Indonesia, it was through merchants and it was not violent, the way of spread. Third, those people who reached Malaysia and Indonesia were Sufis, not Salafis, not like Ibn Taymiyyah, but Ibn Taymiyyah and the Salafis that are the ones who control the area of Arab area in Pakistan. Yes, some other question. Yes, sir, and after this you, sir, my apology. Yes.
Yes, I'd like to ask you, to what extent do you think that the weapon of takfir, if it were employed by the mainstream, whether they like it or not, would have a deterrent effect on people who are on the path of becoming radical? Because to a certain extent, radical knows that he remains within the general consensus.
Yeah.
He's not thrown out of the mosque.
Yeah.
Nobody is saying, okay, you have become, you've joined ISIS, or you've declared your bay'ah to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and so now you are a kafir. So once they still remain in the comfort zone, to what extent could this...
It will help. It will certainly help. If you added it to other tactics, it will certainly help by calling people who become radicals as kafir or infidels. This can have some deterrent effect. I'm not saying this is the only solution because there is no single solution. It's the integration of different tactics that will bring the solution, okay? So in general, this can be very helpful by telling young people, if you join these radical groups, you will be kafir, but that is not enough. The word kafir here has some phrases to continue it to create some level of fear in their mind to deter them. So the word kafir by itself is powerful, but to make it really effective, you have to add it. If you died, you will go to hell in this way. You have to complete the package. Okay, that's the word is important, but you need to really complete the word. Yes.
As I am from Middle East, I used to teach in Marine Corps University, and we have Quran in Arabic, Quran in English.
Yeah.
And I read Quran many times in Arabic, and I am a writer in Arabic. I saw a big different translate there. So as we know, we are not against Muslims. There's a lot of good people in Islam. They, like you said, the first circle.
Yes, a couple of first circles.
Muslims. And my opinion, there's a lot American, they don't have a clue about Islam, and they are surprised. They say, oh, this is a nice, peaceful religion. They are good people.
They see only the outer two circles. That's the problem.
No, they are good people. They are nice, and could be they are not. They are radical, but they have to do taqiyya, which is the holy lie, or ma'arif, the holy lie. So, but my opinion, is that going to be a solution if we put a couple years in school for our generation to study Islam and focus on those verses in Quran and put them underneath the microscope, so no one can say no unless somebody give us proof this is not not true or this is not exist in Islam.
So you mean to teach the areas of violence? You mean the opposite?
To let others, not Muslims, to understand Islam, so they understand why those people they doing this. And if there's somebody in high scholar in Islam...
Look, I appreciate that you are trying to make peace, but sometimes you need, before understanding a problem, you need to confront it. So I mean here, there is some threats that we need to care of them, and teaching Islam in this way has to be also honest. So if you are going to teach some peaceful verses, you have to bring also the areas that causes violence as well. So, and I think putting Islam to critical analysis, this is the word I will use here, putting Islam on the table for critical analysis, either in the media or the school or in debates or discussion, and bringing the discussion with respect. Because let me tell you an honest thing here. If religion is something generally very sensitive, and it works at the level of the subconscious, to distinguish between conscious and subconscious, it's like exactly if I said to you, look, I know clearly that cigarette smoking is harmful and it can cause cancer, but between me and you, I love it. That's exactly how the conscious work, and then the subconscious. I love it. So the religion here is like this. The moment we start insulting the religion directly, people will not think. The level of discussion will go to the subconscious. They will become furious, violent. End of discussion. If you want to put Islam to critical evaluation analysis, you can do this with respect, and this can be very powerful because you will stop the subconscious, emotional, erratic, crazy reaction, and you will bring people to the thinking process, telling them, like for example, in latest in this YouTube that I did in Arabic for anti-radicalism, I used what is called the generation effect. I asked the people who are listening to me, they are big numbers, I said to them, imagine if someone came to you and said to you, my religion is peaceful, and to prove to you how peaceful it is, we declare war on you, and we offer you 3 options, Islam or Jizya or to be killed. What will you say about their religion? What will you feel when someone take you as a war prisoners after that and put you in the slave market? Will you say that this religion is respected or holy or anything? Or will you disrespect it? Then don't be surprised when people have the same feeling toward your religion. In fact, I put it in a bit funny way initially after being serious, or before being serious, I put it, the title of it was Samahatul Buziyya, which is the peacefulness of Buddhism. And I pretended imagination, and I said it is imagination, it's not true because Buddhism does not teach it. I pretended that I have a Buddhist friend called Ching Yang Bung, and he said to me one day, I want to talk to you about how Buddhism is peaceful. And then I took them further, that he said to me, look, we offer you 3 options, Islam or Jizya, Buddhism or Jizya or to be killed, and we take your wives and women as sex slaves. Don't you think this is it peaceful or not? And I put them in reversed psychology manner. So you need really to use different tactics, but the concept of putting Islam to critical analysis, but in a more of a thoughtful process, rather than just attacking, like it will become like table tennis, ping pong. But if you bring it to the table to critical analysis, we will be winners, sure. Yes, sir. Last question, just because, yes, sir.
Our president is one of the smartest people in the world.
Possibly.
So
I have. I'm not saying no or yeah, I'm saying possibly, yeah.
Can you help us understand? He probably would disagree with 90% of what you said tonight. Can you help us understand what is he thinking?
I'll tell you. Look, it's long story, and what he's thinking exactly is hard to tell, but he is affected by his maybe liberal progressive way of thinking on one hand, maybe by his upbringing in some Muslim countries that creates in the subconscious level, a different feeling than other people. Maybe he thinks that that is the best way to go, and until recently when he realized that there is something with the ideology that he cannot ignore, he started to address it. So I cannot put bad intentions, but I can say it could be a mix of different things. One of them is lack of knowledge, one of them is emotional upbringing, one of them is liberal progressive ways of thinking that think that tolerance, for example, to everything is a solution. So I can say it could be a mix of different factors, and it's very hard really to tell specifically which factor of them plays the major role. Thank you so much again. Pleasure.
We want to leave Tawfik with a moment to sign any books in the next room, if there are any books left. I will leave you with one thought of a very tricky situation that Winston Churchill faced when the King of Saudi Arabia was coming to 10 Downing Street for dinner. And his ambassador arrived and informed Churchill that in His Majesty's presence, before, during, or after dinner, no alcoholic beverages will be served for religious reasons. And Churchill responded, before dinner, champagne will be served, during dinner, Bordeaux, and after dinner, cognac, for religious reasons. And so it was. From the Westminster Institute, we wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Holidays. See you in the new year.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.